Miami Hurricanes just held their 10th practice of 2023 spring football. Here's what stood out.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, your host. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first and your second listen, our second episode of the day. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts and free on YouTube. So, went out bright and early to the Green Tree practice fields today. And as I'm, walking from the, there's two fields that are next to each other. As I'm walking from the field where some of the offensive players were working out, I'm walking over to the far field where I see the defensive backs, and I see this towering skyscraper of an individual standing with the safeties ready to start drills, and he's wearing a red non-contact jersey, so you can't see the number he's wearing. And I start to walk closer. I'm like, wait, hold on. This guy's standing with the safeties. He's towering over everybody. That can only be James Williams. Is it James Williams? Yes, it was James. That's a great sign for him, working his way back from the shoulder injury and the offseason procedure that he had. That James Williams, this was the first time he was seen out there on the field, going through drills with his teammates and coaches at Green Tree this spring. I love to see it. You remember James, as I mentioned, shortly after the season finished last year, had a procedure on his shoulder. I don't know if maybe I was just in the dark on this one, but I wasn't expecting to see him even doing drills at any point during spring football. So this was a big bonus for me to see James out there. Now, James, of course, alongside Cam Kinchins, coming off an All-American season, are Miami's two projected starters at safety. And with James having missed spring practices up to this point, we've seen a lot of extra work from a guy like Markeith Williams heading into his second year, heading in his redshirt freshman year. I'm a big fan of Markeith. I was watching him today. He's a tall, lanky guy, 6'2". He looked like the tallest safety out there up until James today stepped on the field. But Markeith, I've enjoyed watching him. He's looking good and fluid out there. And Caleb Spencer, the early enrollee freshman, has been one of the best stories out there, along with Cam Kinchins, who's looked absolutely solid, and he's like a coach on the field. But to see James out there was great. We only get to watch individual drills, portions of practices. So, of course, with him wearing the non-contact and coming back from an injury, I'm sure he didn't participate in the team drills and the 11-on-11 stuff, but he was moving around there a bit. He was wearing some kind of a brace, on the left arm going up to the shoulder, clearly, of course, related to the procedure and the injury that he's coming off of. But I think it's a great sign that, in my opinion, it's looking like his recovery is ahead of schedule. And folks, the other reason why I think it's so important to get him on the field doing some work with his teammates and his coaches, because he's got that new coaching when it comes to defensive coordinators, right? Installation is happening out there. Lance Guidry is trying to get everybody up to speed. And then the other part of it, with Lance Guidry being the new defensive coordinator, the safeties are the ones that are especially benefiting from that, because Guidry is a former safeties coach, and he spends a lot of time with that unit. Like, I sent out a little video today from practice of the safeties doing drills. That specific moment was Markeith Williams working a drill. And you can see Guidry out there shouting out instructions. He does so much one-on-one work with the safeties. So I think it's important for James to be out there now that he's healthy enough to do so, and to be able to get that instruction from Lance Guidry, because, of course, we know the last couple of years, James, who now is going to be wearing the number 20, he's no longer JW0, he's JW20 now. He's got all the potential, size, athleticism. He's a freak. He's got all of that. He just hasn't put it together on the field consistently the way his teammate Cam Kinchins did last year. We haven't seen James put it all together, but he does get those elite coverage grades from Pro Football Focus when, the nerds watch those games and they grade every snap. He gets those elite coverage grades. The tackling grades, not so much. But despite the fact that he wasn't a very good tackler last year or the last couple of years, James Williams still found a way to lead the team in solo tackles last year with 39. And he was tied with Cam Kinchins for total tackles on the team with 59. Now, those numbers defense wide need to go way up this year. I want to see guys pushing for 100 tackles this season, some of the linebackers and some of the defensive backs. Well, preferably not the defensive backs, because you want every running play, every passing play, hopefully to get stopped way before even the safeties get a chance to get involved there. But seeing James out there was really, really good. That's a positive step. Now, on the offensive side of the football, I guess the major thing to note today, and nothing too crazy happened out there, guys. So I wish that every time I did a practice update, I was like, oh my God, I just saw the greatest pass I've ever seen. Like, you remember last week, we had the video that put out of that beautiful throw and catch between Jakari Brown and Robbie Washington that happened during team drills. I didn't see anything crazy like that out there today, but I do have another injury note and then a few observations from what I saw. I wouldn't even use the word injury here. It's not that, but I did see Colbie Young was wearing the red non-contact jersey, but he was moving around very well in individual drills. He probably picked up like a minor nick or bump in the scrimmage that happened this past Saturday, because this was the first practice since the scrimmage. We haven't seen any of these guys since then. But Colbie was out there. He's wearing the red non-contact, but he was looking fine. He was moving fine. Didn't have any sort of, braces or sleeves on or anything like that. He was looking healthy out there. I'm sure whatever it was precautionary, a little bit of a breather for him today. And then the guy who appeared to be lining up as a starter in his place today was Isaiah Horton, who I've got very high hopes and dreams and expectations for this year. Because listen, you talk about how important someone like Colbie Young is with his size at 6'5" and his wingspan and his big hands. And now with Colbie, the exciting thing about Colbie Young heading into this coming year is he's shed some extra weight. He's transformed his body. So he's becoming a lot quicker out there. He wanted to shed some weight to add some speed, and whatever he did seems to be working there. But then you look at the next man up with that sort of a body type, Isaiah Horton at 6'4", heading into a redshirt freshman season. He looks the part, right? And he's had a very good spring practice so far. So Isaiah Horton getting some more reps today in the place of Colbie Young. I always like to see what Xavier Restrepo is doing out there, because he's so consistent. He doesn't drop anything. He was out there looking good today. Out of the quarterbacks, I found myself in previous sessions focusing a little bit more on the backups. Today, I made an effort to really watch Tyler Van Dyke all the way through. And I thought, just from the individual drill standpoint, because again, I didn't get to watch the team drills when you have more of like the scrimmage-like situations happening. But just in the individual drills, in my opinion, this was probably the best that Tyler Van Dyke has looked to me in now the 10 sessions that we haven't been able to watch all of them. We've been able to watch 8 out of the 10 sessions, because 2 of those were closed scrimmages. I thought this was the sharpest Tyler Van Dyke has looked. I was watching him going through his accuracy drills, throwing at targets, and he was almost 100%, might have been 100% throwing at targets. It was pretty crazy out there. They were doing some ball placement drills for downfield, deep throws, sideline throws. He hit a couple nice ones of those, including a really good throw and catch to freshman tight end Riley Williams that I thought TVD put just the perfect amount of air on that ball and placed it right where it needed to be. So I thought it was a good day for him. And, I've been impressed at times with the other quarterbacks. I didn't watch them as closely today, Emory Williams and Jakari Brown. I did see Emory make a couple of nice throws, and I've been impressed with his footwork throughout. And Jakari has been impressive so far to this point in spring football. So let me see if there's anything else that I didn't get to you guys. And by the way, we are going to be talking in a few minutes some recruiting with our recruiting expert on the Locked On Network. John Garcia Jr. is going to join us. And we're going to focus on quarterback recruiting, because, again, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm very, very concerned on the intel that I've been receiving the last couple of days. Very concerned about Air Noland. I am expecting him to pick the Ohio State Buckeyes this Saturday, not the Miami Hurricanes, when Noland announces his verbal commitment. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope something changes over the next few days. But I am expecting Air Noland to pick the Buckeyes. So we got to talk about plans B, C, D, and E at quarterback for the class of 2024. And listen, when I talk about quarterback recruiting for 2024, I don't mean that as any slight to guys like Emory Williams, who just came in the 2023 class, or, Jakari Brown, who's got 3 years of eligibility left. I'm fine with these guys, but you have to think Miami needs to be taking quarterbacks every single year. So it is important, right? And in fact, I think they're going to be looking to take 2 quarterbacks this year. So if I'm focusing on next quarterbacks in, I don't mean that as any slight to the guys that are here. But this is an every year thing. You're talking about recruiting 1 or 2 quarterbacks, hopefully really good ones, every single year at the University of Miami. So we will talk with John Garcia about plans B, C, D, and E. And yeah, I think that'll put a bow on today's practice. I will be out there again on Thursday at Green Tree. So keep it locked right here. We're going to talk to John Garcia Jr. next on Locked On Canes, right after we talk about the awesome folks at Built Bar. Guys, I know it's April now, but the Built March Madness bracket, it's still going. And we are down to the finals. Unfortunately, just like my Canes were eliminated in the Final Four, my cookie dough chunk puff was eliminated in the Final Four. It's down to the Final 2, and I'm going to be voting for the Brownie Batter Puff, which is definitely one of my favorites. And the Brownie Batter Puff bar has gotten into the final round, so you can still vote. I just voted 15, 20 minutes ago for the Brownie Batter Puff, which is going up against the Salted Caramel Bar, which is also really good. Like, no matter who wins, I think we all win when we try Built Bars. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff at BuiltMarchMadness.com, you're going to be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing. What makes Built bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. My mouth is watering just thinking about it. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now. Vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March and into April, so hop in and support your pick. You know I have, because I love me some Built bars. We are joined now by Locked On Network recruiting expert John Garcia Jr. So, John, I've never wanted to be wrong this much in my entire life, but I'm fully expecting this Saturday Air Noland to pick Ohio State, not Miami. Are you getting those same signals?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go off of the timeline of visits, especially Ohio State getting that last trip and extending that offer in person, even though Air and all of us expected that offer to come from Ryan Day and that coaching staff, doing so on a visit over multiple days right before you make that commitment does seemingly point this thing to Ohio State's direction. But look, you never know. There were different points in this process earlier this spring where Air was like, hey, I kind of know where I'm going. And I think that was very positive in the Miami direction, which got one of the more recent visits at the end of March. And the Canes have been pushing here. I think the Shannon Dawson effect is very much alive with Air Noland. Miami's no worse than second or third in this race. I know no moral victories in recruiting and all that fun stuff, but to gain that type of ground for a state champion out of Atlanta, blue chip top 100 quarterback in a couple months is a really big deal and a great sign for things to come, even if Noland does go through with that Ohio State commitment like most of us are beginning to expect. But here's the other thing. I don't think Miami slows down. They're already recruiting multiple quarterbacks that are committed elsewhere. Why would they just abruptly end the courtship of Air Noland? Try to continue to court him. You've got a former teammate of his on your roster. You're going to continue recruiting the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta, of course, consistently. Try to get him on campus for an official, maybe a game in the fall, and you kind of let the chips fall where they may. As last cycle taught us, QB recruiting, even this time of year, is anything but finalized, especially when the carousel and the season gets going. You never know what's going to happen. So I don't expect Miami to slow down in its quarterback pursuit for Noland or anyone in general, because not only does Miami have a true need at the position and a new OC kind of piloting this venture, But I think this is a 2-quarterback type cycle for the Canes. So you have to continue to cast a pretty wide net, and that's always going to include committed prospects to other programs. So I think the Aaron Nolan Miami situation is ongoing, even if he does pick up that scarlet and gray hat.
Yeah, and I haven't given up hope completely, but my hope was for this coming weekend that Noland would be the first big domino to fall, right? To get an April commitment from
They
a
need
big
one.
time quarterback. And that's what I was going to ask you, because Miami does, outside of a kicker, Miami doesn't have any verbal commits yet for 2024. They're in the conversation for so many 4 and 5 stars, which is nice, but they don't have that verbal yet. How badly do they need it?
Yeah, I think you always want one as early as possible. And this is the time of year where, again, you don't panic, but you start to say, hey, a lot of kids are visiting, spring games coming up, official visit season is right around the corner. Be a good time to grab a headlining type of recruit if at all possible. And obviously, quarterback is ideal for any program to sort of kick off, no disrespect to the kicker, but really kick off their optical recruiting class of 24. So this is the time of year where I think a lot of programs are beginning to intensify their efforts there. But you don't hit the panic button just yet, but you start to, get a little anxious about it at least.
Okay, so you talked about casting a wide net at quarterback. Let's talk about some of the other names in the mix. And I know that for those who watched one of our episodes yesterday when we talked with Brian Smith, we did talk about some quarterbacks with him, but I've got a couple good ones that I probably should have talked about yesterday and didn't, that I want to ask John about. One of those, John, is going to be visiting unofficially this week, Judd Anderson, who's a tall drink of water, 6'6" quarterback out of the state of Georgia. I've watched some of his highlights and film, and I like what I see there. I certainly love the size. I get enamored with these big quarterbacks with strong arms. What can you tell me about Judd Anderson? And do you think this is the type of guy that if Miami does miss out on Noland, they go 0 to 60 with a player like this?
Very possible. According to Judd, when Shannon Dawson offered him just a couple of weeks back at this point, he said, hey, you're going to blow up in the offseason, so we want to kind of get in now before everyone else follows our lead and starts offering you scholarships. So he's starting to take more ACC visits, was at North Carolina. He's going to Georgia Tech here soon, but some of those programs haven't offered yet. So I think that puts Miami at a strong advantage at this point for Anderson. Like you said, he's visiting on Thursday, which I think is a really big deal, especially if Nolan kind of lets these coaching staffs know, hey, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going here, whatever it is. I think you could start to see pressure, and that's great timing for Miami to have Anderson on campus. And I think he profiles interestingly, not just because he's this 6'6" quarterback with a big arm, as you might expect with that type of frame, but great basketball player, double-double guy. So he's got some real athleticism to his game as well that I think is so intriguing. And he thinks, Judd in this case, he thinks that has slowed down his recruitment a little bit, just to focus on basketball. The day Miami offered, he had a Final Four high school playoff game to play on the hardwood that night. So he had a heck of a day that day. So I think he's kind of worried from a time perspective that he's dedicated so much of it to basketball that it's stunted some of his football recruiting ceiling. But I do think this time of year is when quarterbacks like this, especially with others coming off the board like Nolan and some of these others, they start to hear a lot more from schools in general. So it's a great time for Miami to have, one, already offered, and two, to be hosting him for a visit to sort of build a theoretical lead if and when these other schools start to circle for Anderson, who impresses in person. I've seen him multiple times. It's a big frame and a big arm that it really does execute, but that athleticism makes him a little bit more intriguing than maybe we would think otherwise.
Is it too wild of a comp to say that, just based on what I've watched of Anderson, reminds me a little bit at that age of what's his name, the quarterback from the Justin Herbert. I don't know why his name escaped me. Justin Herbert, who Mario coached in Oregon. Just the frame and the way he moves and his arm strength reminds me of Herbert.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, that'd be a heck of a comparison if Mario wanted to translate that over to Judd. I would imagine that would really kind of light him up, from an excitement standpoint. But yeah, there's a lot of power in that right arm. I think Herbert probably moves better than Anderson at this point, but remember, Herbert wasn't this no-brainer top 5, Elite 11 quarterback type recruit either, because he was tucked away in Oregon, a lot of upside, and people were just kind of curious about how he would physically develop, and now he's the specimen in the NFL. I don't know if Anderson has that type of ceiling, but at the same stage, as you mentioned, Donno, There wasn't a lot of hype for Herbert as well. So I think that's interesting if Mario wants to go that route once he does visit on Thursday. But either way, Shannon Dawson has really been building this relationship in short order with Anderson since really surprising him with that scholarship offer.
Now, another quarterback who's been on Miami's radar, a 4-star out of St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, Maryland. What can you tell me about Michael Van Buren?
This is like the highest rated quarterback that we know least about. Very much kind of keeps things close to the vest and moves in his own direction. A lot of Big Ten schools in the mix here, as you would imagine, I should say. Kid from Baltimore, St. Francis Academy, which is kind of the IMG of the Northeast, if that makes sense.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, big time boarding school that has produced a ton of talent. I think their only loss was actually to IMG this past season, and Van Buren is the trigger man. A big time dual threat, 5'10", 5'11", great physical build. He runs track, legitimate dual threat, standout skill set here for Van Buren, but he's got a quick trigger with his right arm, very much a modern fit for not only spread ball like Dawson wants to play, but RPO and run action from the quarterback perspective, which is something that, Miami doesn't have a lot of on its current roster. So I think that's something intriguing, especially, again, when you talk about taking two quarterbacks in one cycle. The conventional thought process in that pursuit is maybe one pocket guy, one dual threat, or one guy who's ready right now and one developmental passer. But either way, you would find a spot there for Van Buren, who's a legitimate blue chip quarterback. Just again, not a heavy camp guy, hasn't been seen by a lot of people outside of his Friday night tape. But interestingly enough, Miami's been consistent with him since even before Dawson took the OC mantle. He's playing 7-on-7 ball with raw 7-on-7, which is a South Florida-based program with a lot of Miami ties and leanings within that 7-on-7 roster. So I know Jaden Rashada did similar last year, and that might ruffle some feathers, but it can't hurt to build some rapport with some Dade and Broward wide receiver recruits and defensive backs. So I do think there's a little bit more Miami traction than maybe we've given it, credit for over the last few months. And he's, compared to these other quarterbacks, I think he's furthest from a decision, which is probably good news for Miami because they do need to get him back on campus. I think that's the next step. He's starting to set officials. I think Penn State is the only one that has locked him in for a June visit, which tells you that his recruitment is going to probably dip into the summer. So there is time for Miami to circle back around, grab an official visit from Van Buren and present something new and fresh in this recruitment. Fascinating. And today's his birthday as well. So happy birthday, Mike.
Oh, happy birthday. I mean, if us wishing you a happy birthday might nudge you in the direction of Coral Gables, let me offer him a very happy birthday. We're not going to tweet you any corny videos like Penn State did. We do it a lot better down here at the U. So another quarterback who seems to have a lot of mutual interest with Miami is Luke Moga. What can you tell me about Moga, who might be the top plan B guy now if Miami loses out on Noland?
Yeah, if Van Buren's the most intriguing dual threat, Moga is right on his heels from the Miami perspective. This is a 6'2", 6'3" guy who runs 10.8 in the 100-meter dash. I mean, this is a super intriguing dual threat. And if you talk about developmental types, I mean, this kid was playing another position earlier in his career, but quarterback wise really hit his stride a little bit, at least from a flash perspective there as a junior out in Arizona. Close friends with Dylan Hipp, the Arizona tight end recruit who has now visited Miami. It was actually Moga that kind of nudged him and said, hey, you got to get down to the U if you can. And, after Moga took that January visit, he has since returned for a March visit and really clicked with Dawson. It was the first time that he was able to sit down with him in person. Moga told me he feels like a priority for the U, which again, timeliness wise is critical if Noland does move on. So yeah, I'm with you. I think if and when Noland picks another program, Luke Moga becomes the one who's maybe closest to making a decision that Miami is very much in the mix for. And I think it would profile really well for the Canes to grab a quarterback from the Pac-12 footprint that Pac-12 schools want. BYU is in on him. He's got a heavy list of programs, and he's taken a bunch of visits. Oregon involved there to reaffirm that Cristobal connection. But there's no doubt that Miami has already gotten 2 visits out of him on his dime, and he's talking about taking an official now to the U during this offseason. So there's no doubt there's clear traction and momentum with Luke Moga, and he's a guy that Canes fans need to familiarize themselves with just a little bit more. Again, not the polished passer that Aaron Nolan or Van Buren or Anderson is, but developmental-wise, especially when you're taking two, the athleticism is there in spades, and there is arm talent. He just doesn't have the experience that some of these other guys have, at least just yet.
How common is it these days for players to make a verbal commitment before they take any official visits? Because that's what Aaron Nolan's doing, right? He's going to be making his verbal this Saturday, and then he's going to take official visits. Maybe he'll only take one to the school that he picks, but he hasn't taken any OVs yet. Is that becoming more of a common thing these days?
Yeah, a lot of schools this cycle, I'm noticing in particular, are pushing OVs to the summer. There's not a lot of schools conducting spring official visits, which used to be thought of as, hey, this is all for quarterbacks. Get your spring official visits in. Let us court you 48 hours on our dime, red carpet, all of that. We're not seeing that a whole lot. But in turn, quarterbacks are obviously being offered earlier and earlier, which means they're visiting schools on their own dime sooner and sooner. So I do think quarterbacks are more familiar with these campuses and with these options. And obviously, they're mostly priority recruits, right? So they're hearing from the Crystal Balls and the Dawsons of the world more consistently anyway. So they're a little bit more informed relative to others making decisions. But yeah, kids want to make decisions before their senior season for the most part. And schools aren't pushing for early officials as much as they used to. I think the portal is probably the primary culprit there, especially with the May window ahead of us. So the summer official visit window is still big from the school's perspective, but these quarterbacks want to come off the board sooner rather than later in most cycles. And this 24 class has really pushed that envelope. It's like most of the blue chip recruits are already making their decisions or set to, like Nolan is come Saturday.
Great stuff here as always, John Garcia Jr. Follow him on Twitter at John Garcia_Jr., Locked On Network's recruiting expert. John, thank you so much, man. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for having me.
We will talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.